thing that I want to do, because for those who don't know, I grew up in a strict Christian household. I have religious trauma syndrome, RTS, so I'm very familiar with how evil the God of the Bible is. But I think that a lot of people aren't. I think that a lot of people generally think that the Bible is, a good book of morals, and they don't understand what is actually in it. So what I want to do is begin by really explaining why the God of the Bible and the Christian God in general is such an evil being. And then we're going to contrast it with the true God and see how Jesus Christ has been argued to be the son of that God by various different Christian sects throughout the ages. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is read some excerpts from this article as usual. Now, this article is written by Tim Zeke, called God, Is He Good or a Monster Like No Other? And it's on medium.com. And if you like what I'm reading, go give Tim Zeke a follow over there. Now, Tim has compiled a helpful list of verses that he got from another website. I forget what it is. We'll find out in a minute. That describe exactly why this God is so vile. So first, to begin with, let's take a look at what Tim says here. So Tim says it's absolutely amazing how many people claim that the God of the Bible is all about love and goodness, despite the hundreds of passages, and he says, and yes, there are literally hundreds of them, that describe something entirely different. And that's one of the main points that I want to hit home right here, because you've probably heard over and over, that God is love, God loves you, how loving God is. But there are literally hundreds of verses that show the complete opposite of that. And that's important to understand, because a lot of people don't actually read the Bible. What's in the Bible is quite troubling, to say the least. So Tim continues by saying, below are characteristics and adjectives that depict the God of the Bible. Each one is linked to several additional scriptural passages that validate the charge. So this is compiled from Dan Barker's book. Dan Barker wrote a book, and I believe listed some of these verses. But this is important to understand. Okay, so there are many verses here. And again, the reason why I'm reading these and telling you about them is because I want you to understand really how evil this being is. So first we have cannibalism. Cannibalism. In Deuteronomy 28, 47 through 57, it says, and this is, remember, this is from the Bible. You can go look it up if you'd like right now, read along. Because you did not serve the Lord your God with joyfulness and gladness of heart. Okay, let's see. Because you didn't serve the Lord with joyfulness and gladness of heart. It doesn't even say because maybe you did it you were kind of in a bad mood when you did it. So what's the punishment for this, for not serving God with joyfulness and gladness of heart? Well, let's see. You shall eat the offspring of your own body, the flesh of your sons and daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you. So as punishment for not joyfully serving the Lord, they will eat and cannibalize their own sons and daughters. So please tell me if that sounds like a loving God to you. In what universe is this a God of love and a God of forgiveness? And a lot of people will argue and say, oh, well, it's because God wants to give people free. It doesn't make any sense. The argument is usually like, oh, well, God wants to give people free will, and because they chose to sin, well, that was their choice that these bad things are happening. Okay, first of all, what kind of free will is it if you're like, okay, love me, or else you're going to cannibalize your children? That is not a very good exercise or method of providing individuals with free will. Let me ask, do you feel like you would really be free in that choice? If I'm like, hey, guess what? Either you love me, or your choice is to love me, or you're going to have to go eat your children. What kind of choice is that, first of all? And then second of all, what kind of God would use that as a punishment? This isn't even a huge offense either. It's not like these were terrible deeds that these people did. They just didn't serve God with joyfulness in their heart. So let's continue. By the way, you get to watch me get triggered in real time. Yay. I get a little passionate when I talk about this because, like I said, I grew up in a Christian household. I have RTS, religious trauma syndrome, so it's a little bit frustrating for me, a little triggering. So, I apologize if I get a little heated or ranty, but maybe you can find entertainment in that. So, there's a lot. Here's one that's very interesting. You know how so many Christians are pro-life? Well, take a look at this. Numbers 5:21-22. May the Lord cause you to become a curse among your people when he makes your womb miscarry and your abdomen swell. May this water that brings a curse enter your body so that your abdomen swells or your womb miscarries. All right, so making a lot of people have miscarriages here. Here is how bloodthirsty God is. This is Deuteronomy 32:39-43. There is no God besides me. I put to death and I bring to life. I will make my arrows drunk with blood, while my sword devours flesh, the blood of the slain and the captives, the head of the enemy leaders. Does it sound like a God of love to you? By the way, I want to put this in perspective because to any logical individual, this is going to be confusing. This doesn't make sense. This is obviously not the attributes of a God of love. Well, the reason why is because this was never intended to be a God of love. Yahweh was a war God. Yahweh was a war God, one of many different gods. But throughout the evolution of this religion, Yahweh became adopted as a monotheistic God within this religion. So Yahweh was originally one of many gods and was a war god. Now, in that context, do these verses make more sense? Clearly they do. Clearly, these are verses of a bloodthirsty war god, a god that you'd call on if you were going to go massacre people. But guess what? This became absorbed and elevated to the status of the one true God. So now here's the interesting idea. I just want to see how many there are a lot of these verses. Look, there's just misogyny, there's racism, there's sexism, there's slavery. Exodus 21:7, when a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. There's Deuteronomy 2:32-34, and the Lord our God delivered him before us, and we smote him and his sons and all his people, and we took all his cities at that time, and utterly destroyed the men and the women and the children of every city. We left none to remain. Genesis 6:6-8, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, people together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. Look at this. Look how sick this is. Numbers 31:7-40. They fought against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses and killed every man and all the boys and women who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. So basically go kill everyone and then forcefully make your wives. You know what word that is, but I can't say that word on YouTube. The women. When you go out to battle against your enemies and the Lord your God hands them over to you and you take them away as captives and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and are strongly attracted to her and would take her as a wife for yourself. And so there's just a lot of sexual assault. Pretty much there's incest. There's basically anything that you can think of is abundant in the Old Testament. Okay? So, again, like I said, there are verses upon verses upon verses here. You can read them for yourself if you want by checking out this article. I'm not going to go through all of them because I'll just get ranty and angry. And we'll get off topic here because that's not the main topic today. But I hope you can see at least why the God of the Bible is not a God of love and is clearly a psychopath. Now, here's an interesting thing. And this is what I was taught as well. Because usually if you go to a Christian and you say, oh, well, look at how terrible the Old Testament is. Look at all these horrible things that happened. How do you explain that? Well, they usually go, oh, well, that's the Old Testament. It doesn't really apply anymore because you see, Jesus came and overturned the old law and he forgave everyone's sins. And so because of Jesus, it's really just the New Testament that we pay attention to. All right, so there's a couple things that are wrong with this. First of all, and this is all going to tie into what we're talking about today, but I'm passionate about this, so I'm going to talk about it for a minute. So first, there's a lot of problems with this. First of all, there are still a lot of negative things in the New Testament. In the New Testament, there's still a lot of misogyny and slavery. So even if you're trying to say the Old Testament doesn't apply, well, the New Testament still has negative things in it. The other aspect of this is that it's not consistent at all because a lot of Christians still try to enforce certain things that are in the Old Testament whenever they feel like it. You know, they'll try and find verses in the Old Testament that they say is against homosexuality, for example, and they'll sure as heck want to say that those verses apply, but then they'll try and dismiss the other ones. So then they cherry pick what applies and what doesn't apply in the Old Testament. But here's another thing that's a very important point, is that according to Christianity, according to mainstream Christianity, Jesus and the God of the Old Testament are the same being. So Jesus is described as the Son of God, but really, it's just supposed to be God in the flesh. So according to mainstream Christianity, Jesus Christ and the God of the Old Testament are the same being. So everything that the God of the Old Testament did, if you're following mainstream Christianity, that's what Jesus Christ did as well. So you can't be like, oh, well, Jesus is a God of love, but the God of the Old Testament, yeah, he was a little harsh, but then Jesus came around and things got better. Well, according to Christianity, that is the God of the Old Testament is the same being as Jesus Christ. So you can look at these verses in John 10:30, where Jesus says, I and the Father are one. And John 14:9, whoever has seen me has seen the Father. So in Christianity, it's considered that Jesus Christ and the God of the Old Testament is the same being. So you can't use that as a cop-out. But here's the main issue that we're talking about here with regard to the secret God and the God of the Gnostics. Because in early Christianity, when Christianity was forming and first developing, there was a really big problem. And the problem is that followers of Christ were taking a look at the scriptures of the Old Testament and being like, okay, Jesus Christ seems nothing like the God of the Old Testament. They seem like completely different beings. And so many early Christian sects, like the Gnostics and the Marcions, and then later in history, like the Cathars, believed that the God of the Old Testament was a dark God, an evil God, a false God, and that Jesus Christ came from another God, a higher God, a secret God of light. And when you look at the verses that Jesus, in the Bible with Jesus speaking, Jesus even says in one of the verses, I forget which one it is, but you can look it up. Jesus says, "You've heard it say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you, anyone who slaps you on your right cheek, turn to you the left one also." So, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, God declares an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That is something that God declares in the Old Testament. Jesus comes along and says, "You heard that, but that's wrong. I tell you to do the opposite." So, don't you think that that is a big contradiction here? If they were to be the same being, why is Jesus Christ completely contradicting the God of the Old Testament? So anyway, the early, a lot of early Christians looked at this and said, the God of the Old Testament isn't the true God. This is an evil God. This is a wrathful God. This is a vengeful God. This is an evil deity. Jesus Christ must come from another God. So in those terms, when you think about it this way, and by the way, Marcion was the individual who compiled the world's first Bible, the world's first Christian Bible. In other words, he compiled the world's first Christian canon. And he specifically created it to leave out the Old Testament. And he created it to leave out the Old Testament to emphasize that Jesus Christ has nothing to do with that God. That's a different God. That's an evil God. That's a lesser God. And it wasn't until later on, at the Council of Nicaea, where the church decided on what Christianity really would be and the state of Jesus Christ and his relationship to God. And that's where they started to enforce their narrative backed by the power of the Roman Empire. So they started offing everyone who disagreed with their view of Jesus Christ and Christ's relationship to God as being the son of that God. They started offing the Gnostics. Later on in history, with the Crusades and the Inquisition, they offed the Cathars. And so we have the version of Christianity that we have today because anyone who disagreed with it was offed. But anyway, when you take a look at the idea here that Jesus Christ is actually the God of another God, then these verses make a lot more sense. So even in John 10:30, when Jesus says, "I and the Father are one, and whoever has seen me has seen the Father," if you think about it in terms of a different God or a higher God, not the God of the Old Testament, then it makes a lot more sense. Jesus is saying, "I am one with God." That's what Jesus is saying. "I am one with God, and when you see me, you see God." And what does this mean, though? If we take a look now, let's take a look at the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas is a banned Gnostic text, once banned by the church. And I recently read the beginning of this, so I'm going to go through it very quickly, because some of you probably already heard this, but I want to emphasize this because it's important. So the Gospel of Thomas says, "These are the hidden sayings that the living Jesus spoke." And he said, "Whoever finds the correct interpretation of these sayings will never die." And it's a great gospel. I highly recommend it. I have a playlist on my channel. Look up the Gospel of Thomas, Morgue Gospel of Thomas, and you can find the playlist there. But here's the important part. All right, so Jesus says, "When you understand yourselves, you will be understood, and you will realize that you are sons of the living Father." So Jesus is saying, when you understand yourself, you'll realize that you are the sons of the living Father. Same as Jesus. Jesus, "I am the son of the living Father. You are the sons of the living Father. We are all sons of the..." And I know this is gendered, but I'm just using it in the way that it was written in the scriptures. What this really means, isn't really a gendered like son or daughter or anything like that. It means you are part of God. When you understand yourselves, you'll realize that you're sons of the living Father. If you do not know yourselves, then you exist in poverty, and you are that poverty. So Jesus continues by saying, if you don't know yourselves, you exist in poverty, and you are that poverty. That, of course, doesn't literally mean poverty, but what is poverty? It's a lack of something. You're lacking something if you're in poverty. So Jesus is saying, if you don't know yourself, you are lacking understanding, and you are in poverty. You don't really know what you are. But when you do understand yourself, you will understand that you are the Son. You are the sons of the living Father. So what this means is that we are all expressions of God. In terms of Gnosticism, we are all sparks of divine light from the eternal one, the secret God. So what is this secret God? What is this God? So if we take a look at the secret book of John, and the secret book of John is another Gnostic text that was banned by the church that is about Jesus Christ appearing in a vision to John and telling him what reality and what existence actually is. And it's a great book. I highly recommend it. Again, I have a playlist on it. But I'm going to read to you a part of it where it describes this hidden God, this secret God. And you can read all this, by the way, for free on gnosis.org. Great website. I highly recommend it. gnosis.org. And this is titled The Inexpressible One. So the Inexpressible One. Then they call this God, they call this hidden God, they call the secret God the One. And why do they call it the One? Because that is the only thing that there is. There is nothing else but the One. And so it says, the One rules all. Nothing has authority over it. It is the God. It is Father of everything. So remember when Jesus Christ said, I and the Father are one. When you have seen me, you have seen the Father. When you know yourselves, you will understand that you are sons of the living Father. The One is the God. It is the Father of everything, Holy One, the invisible One over everything. It is uncontaminated, pure light. No eye can bear to look within. And consider the complete difference between this God and then the God of the Bible. We just read a few verses that describe just how vile the God of the Bible is. The One is the invisible Spirit. It's not right to think of it as a God or as like God. It is more than just God. Nothing is above it. Nothing rules it. Since everything exists within it, it doesn't exist within everything, within anything. Since it is not dependent on anything, it is eternal. So it is eternal, and everything that exists within it. So everything is an expression within the divine mind of God. So you can think of this as being like the dream of God. We are all within this dream of God, but we are God having this dream, and we need to realize it. And what I mean by that is think about when you go to sleep and dream. When you go to sleep and dream at night, you're in a dream world that you generated yourself, but you don't realize that. You think you're just a single person. You think you're just a single person in that dream, and you're following whatever story is happening in the dream. You're following it along, doing whatever you're supposed to be doing in the dream, baking a cake or taking a hike, whatever, running away from a T-Rex, whatever's happening, it's happening. You don't understand that world is you. And that you are the God of that world. You don't understand that. You only realize that if you have a lucid dream and you become lucid. And then when you become lucid, you realize, oh yeah, I'm dreaming. I can do whatever I want. So the world that we exist in right now is the dream of the One, but we are the one dreaming that hasn't realized that it's dreaming. Well, most people haven't. It's what we're trying to do in the Neo-Genian system is wake people up to what they are. By achieving all awareness and eventually hyper-awareness, what we're essentially doing is trying to raise humanity's consciousness to realize, hey, we're all dreaming together. We are all a divine mind dreaming this dream and coming to higher levels of lucidity and consciousness within this dream. Very similar to Hegel's philosophy of absolute idealism, where reality is a system of logic that expresses itself as nature and through consciousness as it ascends and evolves through higher and higher levels of consciousness by understanding what it is through the world that it generated for itself. So, we are all minds. Now, in our system, in the Neogenian system, we are all individual minds. We are all individual souls. So in our system, in the Neogenian system, the absolute, or the one, is a network. In Gnosticism, not so much. It's more like a singular consciousness. You could interpret it in different ways, of course. It's a story, so you can interpret it in many different ways, but it's more like a singular consciousness. In our system, the absolute, or the one, is a network mind, meaning that every single one of us is an individual soul, or what we call a zeta, which is an individual node in the network mind. So every single one of us is a node or neural element of the network mind, which is what we are. So we are coming to know ourselves, through this world that we generate as a network mind. We are the network mind coming to know ourselves through ourselves. We are a single mind that has particularized itself into many different viewpoints that then localizes into a material world to experience physical reality. Now, this continues by saying, it is absolutely complete and so needs nothing. It is utterly perfect light. The one is without boundaries. Nothing exists outside of it to border it. The one cannot be investigated. Nothing exists apart from it to investigate it. The one cannot be measured because nothing exists external to it to measure it. And by the way, do you also see how much more intelligent this system is? Where they're describing to you the essence of reality, the foundational source of all existence. And they're doing so in a philosophical way. Whereas you read the Bible, and what's the Bible? It's just a bunch of stories about this violent being that's offing a bunch of people, commanding people to essay each other, and all the things that I can't say. You can see how different this is. The one cannot be seen, for no one can envision it. The one is eternal, for it exists forever. The one is inconceivable, for no one can comprehend it. The one is indescribable, for no one can put any words to it. The one is infinite light, purity, holiness, stainless. The one is incomprehensible, perfectly free from corruption, etc. And it goes on to just completely describe the different elements of this God. One thing that I want to point out, in that our system, you can know this God, and the reason why that we can know this God is because we can understand. Now, there's different types of knowledge, all right? There's rational knowledge and empirical knowledge. It's debatable whether you would want to call empirical knowledge or not. Depends how you define knowledge in epistemology. But when it comes to understanding what God is, as us, as the absolute, we absolutely can know that. And that's why the Neogenian system is a knowledge system. It's a system for understanding. Particularly the aspect of meta-rationalism is a knowledge system. Now, when it comes to experiencing, see, there's a difference between knowing and experiencing. Knowing what you are is different than experiencing something. So knowing the attributes of God is different than experiencing what it is like to be God. And this is why we're involved in this transformation and evolution of the universe. Because this transformation and the evolution of the universe is God, the absolute network, us, exploring ourselves through its various transformations that require that empirical experience to be able to have that kind of understanding of itself in an empirical, experiential way. So we can have formal rational knowledge of what we are, but in order to experience ourselves, we actually have to do the experiencing. And a way to understand that is, by thinking about the electromagnetic spectrum. If you think about the electromagnetic spectrum, you can write down the equation that describes an electromagnetic wave. And you can write down an equation that describes an electromagnetic wave that oscillates at such a frequency that we associate it with the color red. The color red oscillates at a certain frequency, And we can understand what that frequency is. We can understand the equation that goes along with that electromagnetic wave. But that's different from experiencing red. That's different from experiencing redness. Someone who is blind and has been blind from birth can know everything about the electromagnetic wave associated with red, but they'll have no idea what red is like to have an experience of it. They'll have no idea to be able to, you actually have to have the experience to know what it is. So we are in a system that is coming to know itself through itself, that can be understood rationally and experienced empirically as well. And both of these facets are extremely important to reality. Now, as we understand what we are, and you see the Gnostics were actually pretty close. Now, the Neogenian system, our system, is different than Gnosticism, but there's a lot of it that has a lot of similarities. And you see the Gnostics had a lot of very powerful intuitions about what they are, where they were, and why they were here. They looked at the God of the Old Testament, and they were like, this is crazy, this is clearly evil, this is terrible. Jesus Christ seems like a pretty smart, intelligent, compassionate, empathetic person, and his teachings seem much superior, and let's try and understand reality from the perspective of what we truly are. So what the Gnostics believed then is that the God of the Bible, the evil God, was basically like a dark thought. And I've explained this before, so I'll just go through it real quick for those who might be unfamiliar. The divine mind of the One begins to organize itself into various structures of the mind. And of these structures, it generates beings of light known as eons. And these eons stand for things like wisdom and knowledge and memory and compassion and just different aspects or faculties of the mind or emotions, usually having to do with higher functions of the mind, like wisdom and memory and knowledge and understanding, things like that. So, but these are described as beings, but they represent functions of the mind, because this is a divine mind that is structuring itself through these beings. One of these beings is Sophia. Sophia is an eon, the eon of wisdom. Now, Sophia decides, hey, I want to create something. And Sophia wants to create something that is out of order from the rest of the divine mind. Because the divine mind is structuring itself and it's creating things, but it's all doing through the unified will of the One. The One is sort of directing everything. And it's all happening in pairs. All the eons have like a male-female pair, and they operate together in pairs, in harmony, in unity. And we can understand this as balanced forces. So Sophia decides, hey, I want to create something, but not with my partner, by myself, and without the will of the One. And Sophia does this, and this gives birth to a dark, shadowy, malformed being. Being described as a being of shadow with the face of a lion and just this awful, horrible being. And this being is known as Yaldabaoth, and that is what they say is the God of the Bible. So the God of the Bible is not a being of light, but they call him the dim ruler, because he's a being of shadow, but he has some of his mother's light within him, Sophia's light within him, so he's able to create. He has the power to create, but he's a being of shadow, a being of darkness. But remember, this is all still the divine mind, but this is a dark thought. And so this dark thought then goes to create a material world, and it ends up creating bodies. And again, long story, but long story short, Yaldabaoth begins to trap souls in human bodies to power his creation, because without the souls, the bodies are just laying there, not doing anything. So he needs the souls to power his creations, but these souls are sparks from the divine mind. So basically, like taking portions of the divine mind's consciousness and putting them into bodies, essentially, more or less, loosely speaking. But the problem is that obviously the One is infinitely more powerful than Yaldabaoth. And so if the consciousness of God wakes up within the human, then the human will realize that they are more powerful than Yaldabaoth. So the whole story then turns to how Yaldabaoth is constantly trying to keep humanity in ignorance as to what they really are, trying to keep humanity ignorant from realizing that they are God. And so this is why he, according to the story, divides them into male and female, male representing mind and female representing epinoia, or self-reflective thought, or thought thinking about itself, or intuitive thought, basically the element that allows awareness of the self. This is why Yaldabaoth floods the world, because people start to become too smart, and they're starting not to worshiping him anymore. They're starting to stop worshiping him, etc., etc. So, according to the Gnostics, Yaldabaoth, this dark ruler, this shadowy ruler, and his forces, which he gave birth to, the archons or the rulers, are constantly trying to keep humanity from realizing what they are. So there's this whole battle going on that's basically about a God that's asleep, that's trying to wake up, but the forces of darkness and ignorance are trying to keep it asleep. That's more or less what Gnosticism is about. Now, we can understand that this is essentially where we have found ourselves today. We are reality that has generated a universe for itself, and we are experiencing this reality and experiencing ourselves through ourselves, but we haven't yet awakened. Humanity as a whole hasn't yet awakened. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get humanity there. That's what we want to do through the Neo-Genian system, create a new beginning, create a new consciousness, create a new earth, get humanity to realize what they are. But humanity, for the most part, is sleepwalking. They don't understand that they are God, expressed as a multiplicity and a diversity. And the forces of darkness and ignorance are keeping humanity asleep to what they are. What are these forces? These forces aren't literally like the God of the Bible, but the idea of the God of the Bible and many other ideas are the forces of darkness that keep humanity in ignorance. The religion of Christianity, for example, that tells you are a dirty, rotten, flawed sinner who needs saving and must worship the God of the Bible, is a force of ignorance that is keeping you from realizing what you are. Because as long as you don't look within and are constantly looking to an external savior, an external deity, an external creator, then you will never realize what you truly are. So mainstream religion is one of the main archonic or dark forces that is keeping humanity in this slumbering state and not allowing it to wake up to the fact that it is God. In addition, there are three major systems. There are three major archonic systems that keep humanity in ignorance to what they are. The first is mainstream religion, because it rips your divinity away from you and tells you it's an external being and you have to worship that external being because you're a sinner. So mainstream religion that declares you as lesser than is a huge force of ignorance and obstacle to attaining knowledge and understanding of what you truly are. Another is scientific materialism. Scientific materialism being the idea that all reality is matter, and everything is a random chance and an accident, and you're just a blip in the cosmos, and when you die, you just go into the void and don't exist anymore. Because if you believe that you are unimportant, that you don't matter, that you're just an accident, and nothing happens when you die, there's just void, you are never going to awaken to the fact that you actually are the eternal essence of existence itself. You're not a random accident. You're not a random accident. You're not just a blip. You are the core of reality. You are the mind that is dreaming all of this. Together we are. We are what is responsible for the existence of reality, and we will exist eternally. So that's another obstacle. The third obstacle is capitalism. And the reason why capitalism keeps you ignorant is because it keeps the world distracted in a constant state of having to work mind-numbing jobs just to scrape enough together to survive, constantly distracted by entertainment and mind-numbing activities that are just meant to distract you. And so you're constantly focused on just trying to survive, just trying to make ends meet. And so you don't have the time, you don't have the energy, and you don't have the resources to work on yourself. And so these are, there's a lot of people who get all obsessed about, there's archons trying to keep us here and whatever. that's all a distraction. As long as you're focused on, mystical beings in the sky, you're not going to be focused on the real obstacles, which are mainstream religion, capitalism, and scientific materialism. And this is why we need to have a new world, a new beginning, through the Neo-Genian system of understanding what we are, where we are, and why we are here, through meta-rationalism, where we can understand our true nature of divine beings in a rational way, and through a teleocratic planetary civilization, where we shift the focus from money and work to maximizing the quality of life for all and purpose. That's what telos and teleocratic means. It means purpose. We want to shift from, let's maximize the GDP to let's maximize the quality of life. Money is not an end. Money is simply a means to an end to create a better life for me and you and everyone here. So we have to realize when we're talking about the secret God versus the God of the Bible, this is us. We are the secret God in a battle of waking up versus the forces, the archonic forces of ignorance. You see how this is all allegorical. It's archetypal. It's symbolic for what's happening to us right now. This is real. This is what we're going through. And this is what we have the power to change, because once we realize that we're dreaming, we have the power to change the dream. Just like Yaldabaoth was terrified that when humans would understand what they would realize that they are more powerful than him. When we collectively realize what we are, we will realize that we're more powerful than these forces of ignorance, and then we can recreate the world in our collective image, rather than the image of a few global elite billionaires who want the rest of the world to burn so that they can have a better life for themselves and screw everyone else. Instead, we want to create a world where we maximize the quality of life for not a few, but for all, where we have equal opportunity for all. That's what we want to do. We want to realize that we are a powerful collective, and that is the truth about understanding the secret God. The secret God, where's the secret God is you. When you look in the mirror, you're looking at the secret God. You are looking at the hidden God. You are looking at the dreamer of dreams. And so we have to constantly remind ourselves that this is all very real. And this is a battle of consciousness. It's a war of the mind. And we have the power to shape it and transform it and change the world. We need to understand that, because it has to become an idea that's embedded in the mind first, because everything begins as an idea in the mind. This is a war of the mind. Like I said, you don't need to worry about some evil god in the sky with wings that's going to shoot you with a lightning bolt or is trying to keep you as a prisoner here or something. What you have to worry about are the archonic forces of ignorance that are keeping you and the rest of humanity in a lesser state, or at least trying to. And the fact that you are watching this still, if you're still watching this, because this is pretty long. If you're still watching this, that's a pretty good indication that this information is important to you and it matters to you. And this is something that you can be a part of, because this isn't something that, it's always important to remember, this isn't something that's happening to us. This isn't happening to us. It is us. And we can change it. We can shift it. We can transform it. But it has to become an idea first. And that's why spreading this information is so important. Because the more people who understand this and have that idea in their mind, the faster we will be able to make a planetary civilization that's maximizing the quality of life for all. And we can finally begin to actually enjoy life. We can have a life that is abundant and prosperous, where we are learning from each other and growing instead of hating and destroying. And if you just look at all the terrible things happening in the world right now, you can see why this world is based on such a low form of consciousness of division and hatred. We need to transform the world so that it begins to realize what it is. Know thyself, and you will know the universe and the gods, because you are the universe and the gods. So I hope you enjoyed that, my friends. There's a lot more